Here's a number that would have sounded impossible just 3 years ago. 1 in every 4 iPhones on Earth is now built in India. Not China. India. Back in 2022, it was barely 1 in 20. Today, factories outside Chennai and Bengaluru are stamping out roughly 55 million iPhones a year. Over $22 billion worth of the world's most famous gadget. This is the story of how Apple quietly tore a piece of its supply chain out of China and bolted it onto the other side of the Himalayas. And why it had almost no choice. To understand why this matters, you have to understand how total Apple's dependence on China once was. For nearly 2 decades, the iPhone was effectively a Chinese product. At the heart of it sat a single, almost mythical place, Zhengzhou, in central China, a complex so vast that people simply called it iPhone City. At its peak, this one site employed hundreds of thousands of workers and assembled the majority of the world's iPhones. China didn't just have the factories. It had the roads, the ports, the component suppliers, the trained engineers, and the ability to hire 100,000 people in a matter of weeks. No other country on Earth could match that. Tim Cook himself argued Apple stayed in China not because of cheap labor, but because of skill, the deep concentration of tooling and manufacturing expertise. For years, that made the relationship look unbreakable. And then the cracks appeared. In late 2022, COVID lockdowns slammed iPhone City. Workers were sealed inside the plant. Some fled on foot down highways. And production of Apple's newest, most expensive phones collapsed right before the holiday shopping season. For the first time, Wall Street saw in hard numbers what all our eggs in one basket actually cost. It got worse. Apple's own position inside China started slipping. Its smartphone shipments there fell 17% in a single year, from nearly 52 million units down to under 43 million. As homegrown rivals surged back, Apple's share of the Chinese market slid toward 15%. So here was the bind. Apple's biggest factory and one of its biggest markets were the same country. A country that was suddenly looking less stable, less friendly, and increasingly at the center of a superpower standoff. The question stopped being whether Apple should diversify. It became how fast it possibly could. If COVID exposed the risk, Washington turned it into an emergency. As the US-China trade war escalated, tariffs on Chinese goods didn't just rise. They exploded. At their peak, cumulative US tariffs on some Chinese imports reached an eye-watering 145%. For a company that makes its flagship product in China and sells a huge chunk of it in America. That's not a tax. That's a threat to the entire business model. Suddenly every iPhone shipped from China to the United States carried the risk of a brutal markup. A cost Apple would either swallow, crushing its famously fat margins, or pass to customers, crushing demand. There was no good option. Except one: move the phone somewhere else. This is the logic the whole industry now calls China plus one. Keep China, but build a serious second home for production so no single government, port, or pandemic can hold you hostage. For Apple, the plus one was obvious: India. It's enormous. It's politically friendly to Washington. It has 1 billion plus potential customers of its own. And its government was practically begging Apple to come. The pressure didn't stop there. The US administration began openly leaning on Apple to make iPhones for American buyers outside of China entirely. And at one point even threatened a 25% tariff on iPhones made in India too. Just to push assembly all the way back to American soil. But a US-built iPhone remains, in the words of analysts, a fairy tale. It would cost thousands of dollars. India, by contrast, was real, ready, and already running. So Apple made a decision that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier. It would shift the bulk of its US-bound iPhone production. The phone sold to its single most important market, out of China and into India. And it would do it in a matter of years, not decades. Saying you'll move iPhone production is easy. Actually building a second China is not. And yet, the speed of what happened in India still surprises people. Take Foxconn. Apple's largest manufacturing partner. It poured around $1.5 billion into a sprawling plant near Chennai. Then went bigger. A 13 million square foot campus near Bengaluru Airport. In a town called Devanahalli. To grasp that scale, 13 million square feet is bigger than 200 football fields under one operation. And Foxconn didn't fill it slowly. It hired close to 30,000 workers there in just 8 months. With plans to reach 50,000. Strikingly, around 80% of them are women. Many first-time job seekers in their early 20s. Then there's Tata. India's most storied industrial house decided it wanted to build iPhones too. Something no Indian company had ever done. In barely 2 years, Tata Electronics' workforce exploded from around 15,000 to roughly 75,000 people. Tata went from a standing start to handling something like 40% of India's iPhone exports. Behind all this sat a deliberate government bet. India's production-linked incentive scheme. Basically cash rewards for every dollar of phones manufactured and exported. Pumped billions in subsidies into the sector starting in 2021. It was designed to do one thing. Make it financially irresistible for global giants to assemble in India rather than just sell there. And it worked. The results show up in the trade data. In the 12 months ending March 2025, India assembled around $22 billion of iPhones, exporting over 17 billion of that. A year later, iPhone exports smashed through 2 trillion rupees, roughly $24 billion, making the iPhone India's single biggest branded export. Think about that. A device designed in California, historically built in China, is now one of the most valuable things the Indian economy ships to the world. In under 5 years, India didn't just join Apple's supply chain, it became a pillar of it. Let's put the speed of this on a single curve, because it's genuinely staggering. Rewind to 2022. India accounted for roughly 5% of the world's iPhones. A rounding error, a side project. By the end of 2024, that had jumped to about 15%. And by 2025, it hit 25%. 1 in 4. Analysts now expect India to push toward 30 to 35% through 2026. Especially as Apple races to make essentially all of its US-bound iPhones in India. In other words, in the span of a single iPhone owner's upgrade cycle, India went from assembling almost none of the world's most important consumer device to assembling a quarter of them. And climbing. There is no modern parallel for a supply chain shift this large. This fast, in a product this valuable. For comparison, it took China the better part of 2 decades to become Apple's workshop. Brick by brick, supplier by supplier, India is compressing that same transformation into a handful of years. And the dollar figures climb right alongside the percentages. In just the first half of the 2026 financial year, Apple exported around $10 billion of iPhones out of India, putting it on track to comfortably beat the previous year's record. Each of those shipments is a vote of confidence that the lines are running. The quality is holding, and the bet is paying off. But raw share is only half the story. The deeper shift is psychological. For 20 years, designed by Apple in California, assembled in China, was practically a law of nature. That law just broke. Every iPhone box that now reads, "Assembled in India," is a small piece of evidence that the most sophisticated supply chain ever built can, in fact, be moved, if the pressure is high enough and the incentives are big enough. And the pressure, between tariffs and geopolitics, has never been higher. The line on this chart isn't just about phones. It's a leading indicator for where the world's electronics manufacturing is heading next. Before we crown India the new China, a reality check, because the gap is still wide. Here's the uncomfortable truth buried inside those export numbers. Most of what India does today is assembly. The final step of snapping together components that are still, overwhelmingly, made elsewhere. The displays, the advanced chips, the camera modules, the precision casings, a huge share of those still come from China, South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan. India is putting the puzzle together, but it isn't yet making most of the pieces. That distinction matters, because the real money and the real strategic power in electronics sit upstream. In components and materials, exactly where China spent 30 years building an unbeatable lead. There are other hurdles too. Yields, the percentage of phones that come off the line flawless. took time to match Chinese plans. Building a deep bench of suppliers, logistics, and skilled engineers can't be subsidized overnight. And the very tariffs that pushed Apple toward India could, with one policy change, be aimed at India next. Consider what's really being captured here. Of the price of an iPhone, the slice that goes to final assembly is famously thin, often estimated at just a few percent of the device's value. The bulk of the value lives in the chips, the screens, the software, and the brand. So when India assembles 25% of the world's iPhones, it is capturing a far smaller slice of the world's iPhone profits. That's not a failure. It's simply the rung India is standing on. And the question is how fast it can climb higher. So the honest verdict is this. India has won the assembly race faster than almost anyone predicted. But the components war, the harder, more valuable one, has barely begun. Apple and the Indian government know it. That's why the next phase is about pulling component makers into India. Deepening the supply chain so a made in India iPhone is genuinely made in India. Not just finished there. If that happens, India won't just be Apple's backup plan. It'll be a genuine rival to China's 3-decade grip on global electronics. And the target Apple has set, pushing toward a third or more of all iPhones, and the bulk of American ones, built in India by the end of 2026, tells you exactly how serious this has become. The factory of the world isn't moving overnight, but for the first time in a generation, it's clearly moving. If this helped you see Asia a little more clearly, subscribe to Asia by the Numbers for more data stories that explain how the world really works.